Hi, Deb Bunnell here, teaching artist with Southern Alleghany's Museum of Art and the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts. Welcome to part 2 of Resilience in Shades of Gray. In part 1, I told you why gray is my favorite color. And not just the gray you get that's halfway between black and white and absolutely neutral. I like all the shades of gray that you can get by mixing complements with each other, just toning down the other colors so some other colors can be full strength and sing. We also studied the flowers that are actually in the painting to learn how they look and how to draw them in different ways. We transferred the image to the canvas, and we did a series of thumbnail paintings to determine how the colors are going to flow and what's going to look best. We came up with a good plan and we laid the paints out on the palette. This painting, Resilience in Shades of Gray, uses the grays to make the wildflowers stand out. The brightest flowers in the painting are the orange tiger lilies. There's also a monarch butterfly in there. And because it's oranges and orange reds, the grays in the background are grayed down versions of blues and greens, which are the complements of oranges and reds. From a distance, this painting is going to look a little like a photograph. It's going to be realistic, but when you get up close, you'll be able to see where my brain started going down its own pathways, and instead of exactly duplicating nature. Sometimes these decisions were conscious, as when I decided to totally gray down the background so the flowers would stand out, or when I decided to make a gradation in the road to draw the eye into the composition, and also imitate that gradation a little bit in the foliage of the flowers in front. They go from light on the left side to more contrasty and dark on the right side. Humans are born to discern patterns. From the moment the baby recognizes his mother's face, or we learn to read, or we learn to do math, or we send people into space. That's all based on patterns. And it's hard to make your brain stop doing that. But there is a famous book on the subject called Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain, where she talks about seeing things and training your brain to really see something to the point where you can put it down on paper, you can draw it. And that takes some concentration. For some people it may come more naturally than others, but I find it takes a lot of concentration to see the exact shapes in nature and duplicate them. I'll look at a group of leaves really hard and think, okay, I know the pattern. I know what those leaves are doing. I can draw that. And at that point, my brain has switched off actually seeing them and reverted to some pattern I remember from before. I think sometimes individuality in paintings comes from that tendency, because everybody has their own pathways they go down in their own way of painting and drawing things. I want to look at a small selection of some paintings of flowers. There's no right or wrong way to paint flowers. You may have a much more dramatic, splashy approach than me. I tend to not be so spontaneous and I like working with detail, but every approach is legitimate, as we'll see. Here from the era of the old masters is Rachel Rush. She absolutely nails every single curl of a petal and bend of a leaf. Another Dutch painter we're more familiar with, Vincent van Gogh, paints these irises in sort of a writhing but very defined way that's peculiar to his own style. A less defined way is shown in Impressionist Claude Monet's painting of wildflowers in a field. They're very soft and they blend in with each other, no less beautiful. Still another approach here is by Gustav Klimt. It's a more decorative approach, and we're looking all the flowers right in the face almost. They're all at the same angle, but there's so many of them and just arranged in a nice pattern. Odilon Redon in his 60s became kind of obsessed with painting flowers. He has a lot of flower paintings, and they all just express joy and a lot of feeling. My next door neighbor, Lugine Delosier, is a watercolor artist who is very splashy and spontaneous with her watercolors. Sometimes she doesn't know what something is until she puts it down, and then it becomes flowers. One of my favorite artists is Georgia O'Keeffe. Her gigantic paintings of flower close-ups almost take you into another universe. They're as much inside her head as they are part of nature. But it's time to come back down to earth. In a very humble way, we return to our Pennsylvania roadside and the wildflowers that are blooming along it. This is the thumbnail we worked from. And here is our first palette. At the beginning of the painting, look how organized that looks. Truly, I really knew what I was doing here. Let's look at the palette, how it will be at the end of this video. Oh my. You can see some paints have dried out, and I've painted over top of some of them with other colors, and I still kind of knew what I was doing, even though it doesn't look like it. Okay, time for some painting. In the last video, part 1, we laid in the road on the sketch, the paint line drawing of it, and we had decided on thumbnail number 4, which has a nice gradation in the road and very grayed out greens in the background. And that's what we're going to be working on first. So, when mixing colors, especially graying down colors, I try to use just 2 colors plus white. And the reason is, going back to paint over it, you can most easily reconstruct your color if you only use 2. Like here's cobalt blue and burnt sienna. That's the shade of my gray there, plus white. If I threw a 3rd color in, your chances of being able to remix that same color are very reduced when you have 3 or more colors. Even though you might get a really cool color, you have to keep in mind if you might need to go back, which I usually do, and change something. So it'll be burnt sienna and blue for the road, and for the greens, I'm going to experiment a little. I was using some crimson to mix with hooker's green and phthalo green, but I also like the results you get with pyrrole red or cadmium orange mixed with the greens. So it'll be one of those. And sometimes if I need to warm the green up, I could get in trouble, but I'm going to add one of the yellows a little bit, still in the grayed out background. So let's see what we get. It looks like I might make this gradation a little more obvious, a little lighter down here. It's nice right in there, but maybe a little brighter here. I found out something interesting experimenting with the mixing greens. I just mixed the hooker's green and mixed it with the crimson first, and I get this nice muted shade. Then I mixed some hooker's green with pyrrole red, and it's just a little warmer. And then mixing it with the cadmium red light, which for a minute I thought was orange, it starts getting olive colored, and even more of a yellowy olive colored when you mix it with orange. So I may use all those mixtures of hooker's green and maybe save the phthalo green for when I get into the brightness down below. So there's the first layer of greens. I did a couple things I said I wouldn't do. I wasn't going to use any phthalo green in the background, but it turns out that was a pretty crucial part of this green here. So I had to use some phthalo, and I said I'd rather not mix more than 2 colors with white for my grays. Well, I mixed every single green from these other reds into this green made with crimson. And so if I have to duplicate any colors, it might not be quite the same, but it'll be all right. This is what the painting looks like now. I went a hair darker on the way background than on the thumbnail, but not quite as dark as on the original. The road has the gradation working for it, and I can't wait to get started on the Queen Anne's lace. Okay, here is the first series of Queen Anne's lace that I completed. You can see how I changed things a little bit from the reference photograph. I moved the camera closer for this next series of Queen Anne's lace, and I'm showing you the brushes I'm using. This brush is for the big areas. I mean, it's a fairly small brush for big areas, but it has a nice amount of springiness and softness. It's a Winsor Newton. This is my weird brush. It's wet, so it looks like a spike, but the bristles are long and there's not very many of them, and it holds a lot of paint, so you can just go right along the stem for quite a ways and do a nice straight line. And it also can be very delicate, and you can do those little ribs right in there of the Queen Anne's lace. And also a teeny tiny brush just for spotting those little spots. Here we go. And here is the second group of Queen Anne's lace. It was fun working all the pinks and greens and blues into them. Yes, finally got those tiger lilies in there. Plus, the laciest of the Queen Anne's laces. So now that we have all the flowers up in the air, I'm going to concentrate on the foliage down below. The greens down here are going to be a lot brighter than the greens on top, but I still want to echo some of the colors up there so it all ties together. And in addition to the greens, there's pinks and oranges and yellows. But I think I want to get the greens down, and then doing the flowers will seem like dessert. It'll be fun. And for the greens, some of the colors I'm going to be using are ultramarine blue and yellow, which make this sort of a mellow green. Cobalt blue and yellow is a little bit brighter green. This is phthalo green and yellow, which is your very brightest green. I probably would add some white to make that less harsh. And hooker's green and yellow, that can be some of the deeper colors. And there's probably room for some from all of the colors in the palette in there, because that's a nice jumble of stuff. There is the thumbnail, and there is the painting. Getting pretty close, aren't we? Just to give you an idea of the real time that's gone by, these 3 Queen Anne's lace and the tiger lilies and all of that green are about 6 hours of painting. The green went pretty fast because I'm going to show you how rough it is. That's about how rough the green part is. I will put a second coat on that will define it a little better. Plus all the flowers down there need painted, and of course our monarch butterfly. That's going to be fun. And when I'm putting on the second coat of green, I'll make any value adjustments that need to be made and anything for clarification. But it's pretty exciting how it's turning out so far. So here's a tour of the painting so far. These are the flowers right next to the road. You can see the gray of the road, and then the foliage begins. None of the flowers are completed. Well, none of the flowers down on the foliage are completed yet, but the green is pretty solid and complex, even though I've simplified it from the reference. And this is the final section of flowers. I like the rhythm of the stems now that the stems are in. That's what attracted me to the photograph in the first place. Here's a view of the entire painting so far, waiting for some flowers to be done yet. I'm not going to do time lapse of all the rest of the flowers because when you're doing such small details, it's not as interesting for time lapse as when you're doing bigger areas. So I will do those off camera and it will magically appear in the next slide. There we have it, all the flowers plus the butterfly. We got the black-eyed Susans in the background, the chicory coming down, and the monarda in the way back, those nice purple flowers. There were just a couple details that I didn't like at this point. One was the black on the butterfly. I actually used black paint and it's popping a little bit too much. I'm going to use another version of black that'll set it down in. And what looks like shadows on the road are actually piles of gravel. There would be nothing to make those shadows, so I'm going to try to make them look more gravelly. So the black on this butterfly here is made with burnt umber and ultramarine blue, plus just a little touch of white, and it just sits it down in the painting a little better. It doesn't pop out like when it was pure black. And I'm starting to work on the oranges now. It was just cadmium orange at first, but now there's some cadmium red light mixed in at the top and some yellow mixed in at the bottom. It still needs some spots and some detail on the body. So here we got the spots on. Boy, do they have a lot of spots. And it's not a scientific illustration or anything. It'll be a little rougher than that, but it will be just as detailed as the flowers are. And here's our finished butterfly. The spots are tidied up a little bit, but not in a real hard, specific way. And she's ready to fly. Here comes the gravel part. I experimented with just a little part of it, putting in some gravel, and I liked how that looked. I like how it's going to add more detail to the front of the painting in the road section. So I went and I put it on all of those things that looked like shadows but were really supposed to be gravel by the side of the road. And it gives the flowers more of a location too. I used some warm grays in there. The road is mostly cool grays, so that gave enough contrast that the gravel stands out a bit. And here finally is the final painting, Resilience, flowers by the side of the road. I like how the gravel worked out, the gradation's looking good. And the oranges, those 3 oranges of the 2 tiger lilies and the butterfly, they aren't the only place orange occurs, which when I looked at the leaves as I was painting the green foliage, I noticed there were a lot of pinkish, orangish, yellowish leaves happening in there. So it's neat how colors travel around the canvas. There's even cobalt blue back in the shadows of the mountains. I don't think I mentioned that, but so the cobalt blue carries through the whole painting. There are sections of that. Thanks for joining me on this journey.